Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this year's Meet Minneapolis annual meeting. I'd very much rather be in person today with all of you, but at this point of the pandemic, we're holding our meeting in a virtual setting because it's the safest option for all of us. But I'll have you know that we're working very, very hard to advocate for safe in-person meetings as soon as possible. Today's meeting includes one storyline that our Meet Minneapolis team and our industry could have never foreseen on March 16th, 2020. Now, March 16th was the day Meet Minneapolis first started working remotely. And it was also 2 days before more than 43,000, that's right, 43,000 fans planned to arrive in Minneapolis for that NCAA wrestling championships at US Bank Stadium. They would have filled our hotels, they would have packed our bars and restaurants, and, well, you know exactly what happened after that. The pandemic, the death of George Floyd, and the civil unrest profoundly impacted our work. But it didn't stop us. It forced us to reimagine what our city and our local residents needed. Through all the struggles and the pivoting, and of course the heartache, the civil unrest, and some more pivoting, our industry has shown incredible resiliency. And that's what today is all about, our resiliency and the road to recovery. So in order to talk about resiliency, we need to look at the high hopes we started out 2020, and then we had those hopes that were deferred, and we had to ultimately redefine what success looked like. Today, we're going to keep the pace moving as we quickly hear from MCC Executive Director Jeff Johnson, Adam Sachs of Tourism Economics, a great speaker. We're going to hear from our mayor, Jacob Fry, and ultimately from our board chair of Meet Minneapolis, Julie Batliner. Today, the goal is for you to learn more about the actions that we've taken and the initiatives Meet Minneapolis, along with our many partners, is spearheading to help accelerate our industry's recovery. To be sure, we want to let you know that we're not doing this work alone. We've become even more aligned with some key partners such as the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, the Minneapolis Downtown Council, BOMA, Hennepin Theater Trust, the Greater Minneapolis Hotel Association, and Greater MSP, because working together to serve our community is as crucial as ever, and we thank all of those great organizational partners. But before we go any further, think back to nearly this time last year. We've lived through a year like none other in our lifetime. And if you could go back to tell your March 2020 self what to expect for this year, what advice would you share?
My trip to get some coffee in the office is going to look very different in 2020.
It's going to get weird. And stock up on wine. You're going to need it.
And think about underwear.
Yes.
There is no way I'm ever going to let my kids wear me down and get a dog.
Contact tracing, essential workers, super spreader.
Do not invest in those extra slacks and dress shirts. Instead, sweatpants and hoodies.
There will be a run on outdoor heaters. Buy 2 and a lot of firewood.
Your new office cube.
Hate dealing with traffic to get to your shoot on time. Won't be a problem in 2020.
You don't really need a dining room anymore. What you need is a home gym.
Stop bragging to your coworkers about the cheap flights you're booking.
Never mind. Matter of fact, don't buy pants at all. No one will know.
No, you think you can binge shows now, but just wait.
Smile more, because soon you'll be wearing one of these. Right?
That was a great video, wasn't it? And how much of that really rings true to you? But now it's your turn. In the chat for this meeting, let us know what advice you would give your March 2020 self. You might have to minimize the window so that you can get to the chat feature. But we'll be sure to share your responses, some of the more creative ones, a little bit later in the program. So show us your creativity. Before we can talk about recovery, though, we need to take a brief look back at this past year's challenges and how we have reimagined our work. Heading into 2020, we were riding high on a long string of successes. We were exceeding the key metrics by which we're measured by the city, and we had high hopes for what we would accomplish in 2020. We were set to welcome tens of thousands of visitors and major groups such as the United Methodist Church's General Conference, gala choruses, X Games, the U.S. Paralympic trials, and so many more. We were really, really hopeful. And then the first unforeseen crisis of the year took place, and our hopes were deferred. The Minnesota Department of Health announced the first confirmed case of COVID-19 in Minnesota on March the 6th. 3 weeks later, state officials issued a stay-home order, hoping to slow the spread of this new and highly contagious virus. From our restaurants and breweries, distilleries, theaters, museums, sporting venues, attractions, public transportation, the airport, and so many of our partners who rely on conventions and meetings for their livelihoods, this shutdown had a devastating ripple effect across the entire industry. As a result of COVID-19 and the pandemic, Minneapolis lost more than 1.6 million room nights and many millions of dollars of lodging tax revenue. The lost room nights were a result of more than 400 canceled meetings, groups, conventions, and sporting events. And with the pandemic raging, another crisis brought national and international attention to Minneapolis: the tragic death of Mr. George Floyd. That has forever changed our city and put us in the global spotlight, but not for the reasons we had ever hoped for. Shortly after Mr. Floyd's death, we shared messages with our stakeholders and in our community. Our stakeholders really wanted and they needed to hear from us because we are the stewards of the Minneapolis brand, and we strive to be their trusted resource. And we also wanted to make a bold statement, one in which we condemn those tragic events of May 25th in a genuine and authentic manner. Calls for social and racial justice included many peaceful protests. However, what many people remember are the headlines and searing images from the civil unrest. This was followed by calls for defunding the police, which once again led to national headlines. And like many other cities around the country, crime rates are rising in our city. And the resulting reputation management issues impact our work and our community's work right here in Minneapolis. But we have hope. That hope is renewed, and that's because there's an opportunity, a tremendous opportunity for Minneapolis to lead a path forward for change. We have that opportunity to candidly talk about the systemic racism that has plagued Minneapolis while acknowledging that we're not alone in this struggle. Meet Minneapolis is addressing it head on in our opportunities to speak, in our presentations, in our communications with our stakeholders, and of course with our clients. We remain focused on the next steps needed for solving the injustices while understanding we cannot gloss over the bumpy road that is still ahead of us right here in our community. So how did we, as an organization, move forward in the face of these challenges? We needed to redefine what success looked like in 2020. First, we looked internally at our business practices and asked ourselves, how do we represent diversity and inclusion in our marketing of Minneapolis? We are focused on promoting the rich diversity we have in Minneapolis, and we want to encourage visitors and locals to explore and celebrate that diversity with us. Born out of the response from the staff, clients, and industry colleagues following the death of George Floyd, we created the Meet Minneapolis Legacy Project. This work will provide opportunities to gather information, to engage and learn from one another, to effect positive change in our community and beyond. In fact, today I am so pleased, I'm so excited to share that our first Speaker Series event will take place on March 17th. Our former Mayor, Sharon Sales Belton, will moderate this entire series for us, and our first two guests will be Meet Minneapolis board member Robert Lilligren and Dr. Samuel Myers. Developing the Meet Minneapolis Legacy Project is just one of many examples of how our team has showed incredible dedication and flexibility to make it through the last year. With travel bans and restrictions, we knew the devastating impact this would have on our local businesses, so we quickly shifted our focus from promoting our city to visitors to marketing directly to our local residents. We created Lots and lots of content. I hope you've been able to enjoy it. To encourage locals to get takeout, to explore a new park, we offered ways to social distance in the city and explained how to be a good COVID customer. We encourage residents to travel the world through our amazing and diverse food scene. And in the fall, we launched our first ever in-market campaign, and this effort was a rally cry to support our local businesses. We called the campaign We Need Us, and it was designed to show people the need to support the small businesses that have supported us all along. And when it came to working with equally devastated meeting planners, our sales and services teams made sure to provide them with all of the support that they needed to do their jobs. Our sales team spent countless months facilitating cancellations and rebookings, and this was in addition to working to secure new meetings and events through the incentives and always using that motto, when you're ready. We created a monthly webinar series featuring local and national experts such as Chief Arredondo and Norma Dean from Delta Airlines. These webinars were designed to provide research and insights on what was happening with consumers and meeting planners so we could all manage this crisis together. So in adapting to all of the challenges of the day, our role has expanded beyond just marketing our city's assets. We're looking for ways to impact policy, funding, and infrastructure. This is what's going to make us successful, all of us successful, in the long term. We've had to take the bull by the horns and continue to transform from a destination marketing organization into a destination management organization. Throughout the past year, we've seen many businesses and organizations adapt and evolve out of necessity. And that's certainly the case at the Minneapolis Convention Center. You know, with most of the meetings and conferences paused as of March of last year, as we talked about earlier, the Convention Center has had to re-envision how it would continue to serve our community. So for more on that, let's head to the Convention Center, where Executive Director of the MCC, the award-winning MCC, Executive Director Jeff Johnson, is standing by.
Thanks, Melvin, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Minneapolis Convention Center. It's a little surreal that we are standing here in this empty auditorium with all of these empty seats. But I know that you have also, in the hospitality community, had empty seats in your restaurants, in your hotels, and in your venues. It's been a very, very difficult year for the hospitality industry and for the hospitality community. But we know that as hospitality professionals, we are go-getters, we are innovators, and we are always looking forward. And so we've had to reimagine success and think of ways to do things differently. And in this pandemic year, we have reimagined our success and really turned that towards being a success for our community. At the Convention Center, we know logistics, and our staff is really good at large events and a lot of people. And so we help the elections department do the logistics behind the ballot drop-off that we had in the city of Minneapolis. We also had a very large building, as you all know, and we were able to support the elections department in having the ballot processing center located inside the Minneapolis Convention Center. That allowed us to have the social distancing that was needed in order to keep people safe, and also the loading dock space for the thousands and thousands of ballots that came into the city of Minneapolis. After the elections started to wind down, we knew that the only thing that would really bring us back into the game and allow us to host events again would be if we could get a handle on COVID-19. And so we entered that fight through working with the state of Minnesota to provide a testing site here in the Minneapolis Convention Center. But that's just the first step, right? So in the last few weeks, we have opened up a vaccination site through the state of Minnesota. And that site is seeing upwards of 3,500 people each and every day that we're open. The community is an integral part for our success. And over this past year, that has just moved to the forefront as we have served our community in these different ways. And we look forward to continuing to serve our community going forward into the future as we start to bring back events into our building. So as we look forward, We know that there are difficult days ahead, but we are excited that the second half of 2021 is looking brighter for us here at the Minneapolis Convention Center. And we're ready. We're ready with new cleaning protocols. We're ready with our COVID-19 plans and making sure that our events, when they come into the convention center, have great COVID-19 plans. And we're also ready with new technology in our air handling units and other areas that will make sure that all attendees and clients that come into our building are safe. We know that we will be getting back to our historical way of being the best convention center in this country, and we know we will do that by, again, diving into serving our community and doing the best for our clients each and every day. We're excited about this, and we know that the times are coming, and we're bringing our staff back and getting ready to serve our clients going forward. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the annual meeting, and we look forward to serving you in the future.
Jeff, thank you. You look really great on the stage of the auditorium at the Convention Center. You know, just like Jeff and the team at the Minneapolis Convention Center, we look forward to once again seeing the MCC alive with activity from convention attendees as well as sporting event athletes and fans. But now, before we dive headlong into our discussion about that road to recovery, let's take a look at some of what you said about your 2020 hindsight and see what you would have told your March 2020 self. Some of you said, don't sweat the small stuff. Bigger things are coming. That is so true. Hug everyone you can. I'm looking forward to that. Hugs and handshakes. Invest in Zoom stock. That's a great one. Would we be rich right now? Be a leader. Always wash your hands. That's something that we probably would not have necessarily said a year ago. So thank you for those comments. Thank you for those comments. You know, it's good that we can still laugh a little after all that we've been through nearly a year, the past 11 months. That's just hard to imagine. But you know, we've all had to find ways to be resilient. And to me, the people who embody resiliency the most are our frontline hospitality workers, and we cannot succeed without their perseverance and dedication. So to all of our hospitality workers, I want to just say thank you. Thank you so much. Wow. Seeing the faces of those workers in that video, that's why it's so important for us to work together to accelerate our road to recovery. You know, keeping businesses open and getting those hospitality workers back on their feet, that's so incredibly vital because they keep the promises we make to all the visitors we invite to experience Minneapolis. You know, last year, more than 20,000 of these hospitality heroes lost their jobs. And as of the third quarter of 2020, the most recent data from DEED, that number of workers in our industry was still down 45% compared to the end of 2019. You know, now for insights into our industry's recovery, which is why you're here today, and specifically the Minneapolis hospitality and tourism recovery, Meet Minneapolis and the Minnesota Vikings would like to welcome Adam Sachs. Adam is the founder and president of Tourism Economics, an Oxford economics company dedicated to understanding the relationship between travel and the economy. Adam, welcome.
Well, thank you, Melvin. Thanks, everyone. It is good to be with you at least virtually today, and I do look forward to when we can be together in person. The remarks that I'm going to share with you over the next 15, 20 minutes are under the banner of planning for the recovery. And I hope that doesn't seem presumptuous, because our view, and I'm going to lay this out in some detail, is that recovery is imminent in terms of its inception. Now, it's going to take some time for it to be fully fledged, but the recovery itself is as nearer than perhaps we even think. So let's go ahead and jump into some of the analysis that we produce for our clients. I'm going to try to tell a story for you of how we think things are going to play out over the next year. Now, let's start with the reality that we do remain in a dismal yet significantly improving situation. If you look at deaths and hospitalizations, perhaps the two most important metrics that we could be following right now, we see that we are, while still uncomfortably high on those metrics, the trend is exactly what we could hope for. And so that is where we are right now. And so it leads me to a bit of historic reflection on where we are right now. And by historic, I don't mean last year, say, 2020, but actually 500 years ago. And my thoughts go to a gentleman named Thomas Fuller. You may not know who Thomas Fuller is. I certainly didn't until fairly recently. Thomas Fuller is responsible for perhaps one of the most irritating quotes that you've ever seen adorn a poster in your life. And that quote, which I know that you're aware of, is this. It said that the darkest hour of the night comes just before the dawn. Now, you'd never say that to someone going through a difficult time. It doesn't help them. So why am I sharing it with you? Particularly because I don't even think it's meteorologically true that it's darkest right before the dawn. But there are some points of relevancy nevertheless. The first is that, just interestingly, this was penned as part of the travelogue of the Holy Land. So Thomas Fuller was in the travel industry when he said this. The second point of relevance, and perhaps a bit of ironic twist of fate, is that Thomas Fuller died of an epidemic infectious disease. So why am I really sharing this with you? If it's generally an unhelpful statement, doesn't help us emotionally, it's for this reason. Right now, this statement is true. And everything that we look at, from travel sentiment data to economic data to scenario analysis, leads us to the same conclusion that indeed the dawn is not that far from us. Now, 2020, as Melvin laid out, was truly a year to forget. And in fact, Minneapolis really bore the brunt of the downturn, both as an urban center and, of course, because of some of the particular issues that Minneapolis faced over the past year. But whether you look at occupancy rates or ADR, the rate on hotels, rooms, or revenue per available room, 2020 was terrible in every single sense of the word and underperformed the U.S. at large. Now, if you compare Minneapolis to other Midwestern markets and other urban markets with whom Minneapolis competes, you can see that the difference isn't so great. Nevertheless, Minneapolis underperforming its peer set due to circumstances entirely outside of your control. So with that as that dark backdrop, why do we see glimmers of hope? Well, the number one reason is this. When you look at what the trajectory of vaccinations is, it looks like we are absolutely on track for between 40 and 50% of the population being vaccinated by the beginning of the summer. You add that to infection-based immunity and warmer weather, and you're looking at a summer where the stage is being set for an entirely different environment than the 2020 summer that we lived through. And in fact, one where, while we will still be living with COVID, is an environment where travel can begin to become unhindered by COVID-19. And so the marketing and sales efforts of your organizations begin to get traction as we approach this date. Now, right now, things are still significantly suppressed, whether they look at auto trips, which are down about 7%, hotel room demand across the country down about a third, or certainly air travel, which is down about 2/3. We're not there yet. And so the next few months are going to continue to be difficult, but I see glimmers of light on the horizon. One of them is that while travel confidence among those in this survey from Longwood that's fielded every other week remains low, you can see that it's been slowly trending upwards to about half of the U.S. population that they now say they feel safe traveling outside their community. Now, what's going to really drive all of this as we move through the year is going to be some of the underlying economic indicators. And the ones that I think are going to influence the recovery the most are the ones I'm going to share with you. The first is what's going on in the job market. Now, the U.S. economy lost 22 million jobs in the early part of the pandemic, but we've regained about half of those. But what you see in the latest data is the job gains have plateaued. And so here we are in a still very difficult labor market. Now, let me put that into context for you. The first thing I want to mention is that the unemployment rate currently at just a little over 6% is actually slightly better than that gray band, which is the average of recessions over the last 60 years. And so you might say, well, that's not so bad. Maybe we're going to be okay on the economic front. But let me just sharpen the focus a little bit. And we need to recognize that because people have left the labor force over the past year, the participation rate is actually at its lowest rate since the 1970s. What this means is that it's actually artificially affecting that headline statistic of the unemployment rate. If you were to have held the participation rate in the labor force the same, the unemployment rate would actually exceed 11% right now. And that's probably a clearer view of where we are in terms of the jobs market. So let me explain something. I'm still incredibly optimistic about the state of the economy and how that's going to support the travel recovery. I'm going to share with you a handful of reasons, and I'm going to hit them one by one. And hopefully these, in your mind, create a catalog of reasons that things are likely to accelerate in the coming months. The first one is that employment gains are very likely to pick up in the spring and the summer. You can see that it's a very different trajectory than in what we experienced in the wake of the great financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, where the jobs market continued to sort of bump along the bottom and only very gradually improve. That's that dark blue line. We don't expect that to be our experience over the coming year. Why do we expect job pickup over the next year? Well, the primary reason, and you'll see this in just a few minutes, is that so many of the jobs have been centered in leisure and hospitality. And those jobs are very likely to be restored as travel picks up in the summer. And that's what creates a very different jobs market in terms of the next year than what we might otherwise experience. The next reason is that interest rates are so very low, near zero right now. And what that's done is, well, it's brought down mortgage rates, right? And so that's been fueling a housing market renaissance over the past 8 months. As mortgage rates are at record lows. It's also decreased the cost of capital for businesses and the cost of debt services for both households and for businesses. All of that is really wind in the sails of the U.S. economy in the coming months. Add to that fiscal stimulus. Put this into context. The blue steps represent what fiscal stimulus was put to work in the wake of the great financial crisis in 2008, 2009. It topped out at $2 trillion. Well, we are already at $4 trillion. We've already doubled and doubled down literally on what was spent in fiscal stimulus in response to this crisis. And there's likely another $1 trillion in the wings right now. And what that produces is actually policy risk upside. We always think about when we do our forecast, what are the risks to the forecast? I get asked a lot, how have your forecasts changed as you've continued to update them over the past year? And my honest answer is that our forecast itself has been relatively stable in terms of the way that we've seen this playing out. But what has changed is our sense of the risks on either side of that forecast. Whereas 6 months ago, if we had been together, I would have been sharing with you very similar outlook, but with significant caveats of the potential downside to that outlook. Now we actually see risk on the upside, and a lot of that has to do with additional fiscal stimulus and the potential effect of that in buoying the U.S. economy, perhaps up to an additional 0.7% over the coming year. So let me get down to the ultimate question that we're all trying to answer, which is when will travel recover? Well, let me start with a few key assumptions. The first is that we continue to be in a very difficult spot. That'll continue through the end of the first quarter, through the end of March, while we continue to make concerted efforts to get the disease under control. But move forward with me to the second quarter, think April, May, June, and then into the summer. That's when the vaccination programs really begin to make a meaningful impact. Now, the variants of the disease certainly represent a risk here. But right now, the consensus scientific view is that still the vaccinations do make a meaningful impact. And so while we may see a bit of a resurgence, it won't be to the level of what we've experienced in the virus over the past year. What that does, as I mentioned, is it sets that stage for a leisure travel pickup into the summer. Now, it's not until the fourth quarter where we really see corporate and group and meetings travel get traction. Now, that's where the environment normalizes. There's still going to be probably lower attendance for events that do happen, and some of the larger events may yet get pushed out into 2022. But we'll begin to see that recovery that we've been really pining for in the group and meetings and corporate sector in the fourth quarter this year. So these are our baseline assumptions as we've analyzed the different scenarios. But let me share with you why I think travel is going to surge in the coming year. The first is that higher income households are actually doing really well. The unemployment rate, if you have a bachelor's degree or higher, is actually 4.2%. All right, that's about half of what it is if you only have a high school diploma. And that's important for our industry because, well, some 60% of leisure spending on lodging is from households making $100,000 a year or more. Now, they only represent 1 in 4 households, but they are our most frequent travelers and our most lucrative travelers. And they have been relatively shielded from the downside of this recession. Add to that, that these households have been saving significant amount of money over the past year. In fact, $1.6 trillion has been saved by households over the past year. That is money that is lying in wait as travelers get ready, and there is significant pent-up demand for travel. And as you can see here, there are significant resources ready to go as well. Now, people are traveling differently. The latest Longwood survey says that, well, 31% are choosing destinations they can drive to instead of fly to. But 30% say that they're reducing the number of trips, but that number is dropping fast. And then quite a number of travelers, 25% in the U.S. are saying, I'm not going to take that international trip abroad. Instead, I'm going to travel domestically. Now, this is important. It's important from a strategic standpoint. It's also important when we think about the opportunity that this represents. Let me explain why. In 2019, there were actually 19 million more outbound trips by U.S. residents than there were inbound trips by international visitors. So if we are in a prolonged period, which we expect to be through the remainder of the year, where there's not a whole lot of international outbound travel or inbound travel, the extent to which we can convert those outbound travelers to domestic trips represents a net opportunity for the U.S. travel industry of 19 million trips, and certainly represents an opportunity for Minneapolis among your key feeder markets who may not be taking that trip internationally, but would be looking for a good domestic alternative. So I'm going to share with you some of our forecasts based on these assumptions. The first is at a national level for the U.S. Travel Association. We predict that domestic travel is going to get back to where it was pre-pandemic in 2022. Now, this year, we see a significant rebound, especially in the second half of the year. And then we cross that boundary and get well beyond where we were in 2019 by 2023. Now, international inbound is going to take longer. And in fact, we don't expect us to get back to where we were until about 2024. But that's where that domestic market can really fill in the gap as the international market does recover. Now, the other disparity in the outlook would be the difference between leisure and business travel, where leisure travel gets back up to sea level, that 100 parity 2019 level, in 2022. But it takes longer for business. This year is going to continue to be a difficult year for business travel. We expect it to remain below half of 2019 levels. Nevertheless, as we move to 2022, business travel groups, meetings picks up significantly. Pent-up demand there in the form of meetings that have been postponed and an eagerness to get back to business. Now, focusing then on Minneapolis, I think I would point out that when you look at 2021, the second half of the year is going to look really different than the first half. And you can see this in the latest forecast from STR on hotel occupancy rates, that while the first half of the year, if you just focus on that, those gray bars, which is the current forecast, is that it's well below prior year, there's 2019 levels in the first half of the year, but it accelerates quickly beginning in May through the summer months, and these are the peak travel months. And I think that is a reasonable expectation given what we see in the external environment and on the economic front. Now, you may wonder, will people continue to want to travel given all that we've been through? Well, historic precedent would say resoundingly yes. Let me give you an example. In the aftermath of SARS, very deadly and frightening pandemic, particularly in Asia, international travel to Asian markets that were most affected was fully restored within 14 to 17 months after the pandemic itself was largely resolved. And perhaps on an encouraging, more current basis, looking at Longwood's data, we see a phenomenal pickup over the last month in the percentage of households who say that they have travel plans over the next 6 months. In fact, it picked up from the low 60s to 81%, which takes us basically to pre-pandemic levels where it was 87%. So this is a phenomenal turnaround. And you can see the levels of pent-up demand as people begin to see that light, the dawn beginning to break, and they are making travel plans and getting ready. So let me just end with a couple of final thoughts for you. The first is advocacy. And of course, no other industry has been hit as hard as ours. And perhaps we've never been as engaged as an industry in advocacy as we have been over the past year. Let me share with you some key metrics that I think really make the case for support for our industry in this recovery period. The first is a reminder that the travel industry in Minneapolis has been a leader of job growth in the city over the last decade. In fact, from 2010 to 2019, the leisure and hospitality industry grew at nearly double the rate of the overall employment market. And so the leisure and hospitality industry, the industry that you're part of, has been driving economic development in the city of Minneapolis over the last decade. So surely this is an industry that we want to get back on its feet. Well, of course, no other industry has been hit as hard. When I look at data that goes all the way through January from the BLS, a slightly different definition, but a little bit more current, we still see the same really dismal story for the leisure and hospitality industry. 40% of all jobs lost in the leisure and hospitality industry. This includes restaurants, includes hotels, and includes recreation, entertainment, and attractions. And you can see that there's no other industry that's been hit nearly as hard as the one that we're a part of. So surely this is one that needs to be supported. And let me make a final point on this. If you look at all jobs lost in the city of Minneapolis, more than half have been in the leisure and hospitality industry. It leads us to this conclusion that the only way that we get economic recovery in Minneapolis is by getting a travel industry recovery. Simply too much of the losses have been concentrated within our industry. And so whether it be funding for destination marketing, safe reopening, funding for small businesses, grants, all the things that we may be advocating for to get the industry back on its feet, we can make the case very clearly that the only way that the Minneapolis economy gets back to where it needs to be is by travel fully being restored. Now, I get asked a lot, how confident are you in your forecasts? Well, let me just state this unequivocally, and this is the way that I put it on LinkedIn now 8 months ago, and I feel more strongly about this than I ever did before, which is that all our forecasts and scenarios are moored to the non-negotiable assumption that travel will fully recover. The pandemic will end. This we see more clearly perhaps than we did when I first made this statement. And the drivers of travel, income growth, demographic shifts, the importance of meetings, and the intrinsic value of vacation will still be intact on the other side. And history supports the premise recovery is inevitable. And we have heard lots of statements about a new normal, Bill Gates himself predicted business travel would only recover to 50% of its prior levels. Others have said that meetings will never come back, or that people will not travel to the same degree that they did before. Well, over the last 25 years that I've been doing this, I have heard these predictions before, and none of them has aged well. And so I would call all of our attention to the reality that the travel industry has always proven to be resilient, and the value of travel has always prevailed through crises. And so I fully expect it to do so again. Now, it has led me to this question, though. All right, will there be an enduring legacy of this crisis? Is there some way in which we'll be changed as an industry on the other side of this? Well, I don't think it's going to be a reluctance to travel, but I do think there will be an enduring legacy of this crisis. And that enduring legacy, I'm convinced, will be gratitude. If you think with me to some time in the not too distant future when you're able to meet together, how will you feel about it in a way that's different than the way that you felt about it in 2019? Won't you be incredibly more appreciative of the benefits and the joys of being together? We previously took travel for granted, right? But we had it taken away from us. And so the way that we will feel about it, and the same, of course, will be true when we're able to travel with loved ones to places that we love, how much we will cherish travel in a way that was different. And I believe that will be an enduring legacy of this crisis that's going to go long beyond the recovery itself. And we'll always look back at that year when we couldn't travel, and in response to that, be more grateful for it than we ever have been. Thanks so much for having me with you today.
Adam, thank you so much for those comments and for that information. Do you have a time to stick around for a couple of questions, maybe?
I'd be glad to.
All right. I have a question for you. One of our attendees says that you work with destinations around the country. What is the biggest opportunity for the Minneapolis market to accelerate its recovery?
I think the biggest opportunity is to begin to message now the benefits of travel. I think a lot of our clients have been asking, should we begin to market yet? And I believe we are entering in a time where it is absolutely appropriate to begin to market. And now where we market is going to matter. And so some of the data that I showed you does indicate that, well, we want to be focused on those drive markets. I think particularly over this summer period ahead of us, those drive markets are going to be really important. And so I think that is going to be the opportunity. But there's a lot of pent-up demand there, and all you need to do is begin to inspire, begin to tap into those dreams, and I believe there's going to be significant benefits to those sales and marketing efforts.
Well, thank you for that. We've had that approach with our phased sales and marketing programs, and certainly I want to just maybe have you comment a little bit more on the gratitude. You said that we have maybe taken travel for granted, and how do you think that will be, a little bit more about how you think that'll be a lasting legacy for the travel industry to recover and even go beyond its previous high marks?
Right. It's like anything in life, right? You appreciate it more when you have it taken away from you.
Yeah.
And so, as we talk to meeting planners and DMOs around the country, even when it comes to rescheduling meetings, they're anticipating significant demand on that other side of it. People that have skipped their annual meeting. So even for those, I think the on the other side of this, there's going to be a significant demand for that because people realized they were missing out. And so on that side, but of course, even more so on the vacation side, we're going to be, I think people are going to, they see travel, not having had it, as how much poorer their lives were without it. And, I think about it, my grandparents and many people grandparents who lived through the Great Depression, how that kind of defined them it wasn't a temporary thing. They always referenced it,
exactly.
That they lived through that.
Exactly.
I think that this will be a reference point for our generation for a long time.
Well, you've got a big trip coming up soon, and aren't you glad that this milestone was this year instead of last year?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, my wife and I are celebrating 20 years of marriage in the coming week, and so we're leaving the kids behind, and we got our COVID test, and we're ready to go.
There you go. Adam, maybe one last question. We've seen a lot of adaptations, a lot of new things that we've had to do to continue with our lives. What travel trends like virtual meetings are temporary and which are permanent in your view?
Well, certainly, hybrid meetings are going to be, a reality over the coming year, and they may endure. Right? There's going to be, I think every single meeting planner is going to be trying to grapple with the benefits of hybrid in terms of widening the reach versus the potential of cannibalizing in person, and trying to differentiate the experience even more will be part of that. But I think that, we could see the hybrid component, which has certainly accelerated the embracing of technologies, and the improvement of those technologies will likely be with us for some time. But I think it's a net benefit, right? There's still enough of a difference in being there in person in terms of what you glean from relationships and partnerships and what you're able to experience, that I don't think that virtual meeting technology supplants in person. I have a joke. Listen, the one thing we've learned from being on Zoom is that if we keep doing this, we're going to lose our minds. And so I don't think anyone is saying, "Hey, this was so much better. Let's just do this."
Yep. All right. Well, Adam, again, thank you for joining us today. And I know you've got lots of preparation for other folks that want to hear you and get benefit from your information. But thank you for joining us and providing your insights on this topic, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
All right. Next in our program, I'd like to welcome someone who understands that our work at Meet Minneapolis creates opportunities for workers, that it also helps support local businesses, and that it can generate millions of dollars in tax revenue, and of course adds to the vibrancy of our city. And that person could be none other than our mayor, Jacob Fry, who is very, very well respected, and he has served as the original chair of our Sports Minneapolis Advisory Board, continues to be on our Meet Minneapolis board. He's been very engaged in helping us secure large groups and events that benefit our city and our local residents. So, Mayor Fry, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much, Melvin, and to the entire team at Meet Minneapolis. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the partnership. And good morning to everyone that's tuning in here virtually. I know that our shared commitment to the resiliency and our shared road to recovery here in Minneapolis is paramount. And I'm honored again here to yet again be part of this annual Meet Minneapolis meeting. And granted, the circumstances are dramatically different than they have been previously, and I very much look forward to seeing you all in person and getting back to some semblance of a new normal there. And there's no question, and I'm sure it's been said before, that Minneapolis has faced some unprecedented level of challenges in this past year, from an economic recession and COVID-19, national global pandemic, the killing of George Floyd and the subsequent unrest. It's been a lot. And I'm sure I can speak for everyone when I say our lives were forever and dramatically changed on May 25th with the killing of George Floyd and the resulting unrest that took place, that sparked this insistence on change in our entire country. And as challenging as the last few months have been, and will continue to be through this upcoming trial here, we as a city, I tell myself this every single morning, we are faced with an opportunity. We are faced with an opportunity to do things differently. We've been challenged to not just get back to normal, but to exceed that normal and create a brighter, more equitable, more resilient future. And that vision can only be realized if everyone is pulling together, if we're working on the same page, and there is that vital investment and work, that industry, that tourism and hospitality here in Minneapolis. It needs to come back in a full fashion. And as Melvin noted earlier, you all generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. You can contribute to the vibrancy of this city, the vibrancy of this state. And I'll note, if you saw the report that just came out earlier this morning, it showed that Minneapolis provides $3 to the rest of the state for every $1 that it gets in return. So in other words, we contribute 3 times that which we receive. And that in large part is due to the tourism industry. That in large part is due to restaurateurs and hotel workers. That's due to the wonderful businesses, both small and large, that we have in our city that we need to contribute to, that we need to do everything possible to make sure that we come back in full form. This, I do believe, can and should be a Minneapolis comeback. And our city has demonstrated our resiliency on the national stage this last year, and we have another opportunity to do so in the coming weeks through this trial. And it's our responsibility as community leaders to honor the magnitude of this moment. But at the same time, to not lose sight of the enormous impact felt by our residents, by our businesses, the major economic drivers in our tourism and our hospitality industry. And we've been working with our local and our state law enforcement partners for months now, going back to late August, culminating in a request for the National Guard going in December. And in these times of uncertainty, we've made an unwavering commitment to ensuring safety in our city. That has to be a top priority, and I can assure you that it will be. Business owners, workers, and residents alike will be seeing some changes coming to our downtown area and our surrounding commercial corridors in the coming weeks. There will be an increased law enforcement presence throughout the city, both additional law enforcement agencies and, of course, the National Guard. And it'll go up to around 2,000 in total National Guard members, leading into both jury deliberations as well as the verdict, and up to about 1,100 law enforcement officers coming from 12 different jurisdictions throughout our state. And we're also working very closely as well with our community partners, our Office of Violence Prevention, our neighborhood community outreach teams. They're going to help ensure that a lot of these agreements that we have are formalized so that we have this immediate and two-way feedback loop to both receive information and disseminate on a very quick basis as well. Over the coming weeks as well, you'll see Public Works coordinating with a number of different jurisdictions, making sure that downtown has as limited traffic issues as possible. And what all that adds up is that in the coming weeks, Minneapolis, we will be open for business. I want to say it again. We will be open for business, especially through the coming weeks, through jury selection and the trial. We are going to be sending out the message that things will be happening. Places are going to be open, and we want Minneapolis residents and those visiting to be patroning our businesses as much as possible. So in closing here, each day I come downtown here to City Hall and I see the impacts that this past year has had on our city, and undoubtedly they've been dramatic. And I know those impacts are felt deeply by everyone that's here today on this call. I have a deep appreciation for your work. I know that it's been hard. But what I've also experienced is that more than anything over this past year is that Minneapolis, we're tough, we're resilient, and we are not quitting. We're going to come back and find form, and I think what people will be talking about in the coming months and years is this great Minneapolis comeback. And as Melvin also said today is about our road to recovery, and we're all on our way. And a lot of ground has already been covered. And the enthusiasm I see here today is exactly this kind of groundswell that we need to get going on in this return for Minneapolis. So thank you so much for having me here today. It is a privilege to speak with you. It is a privilege to be your mayor, and I'm honored to partner with you on this road. Thank you, Melvin.
Thank you, Mayor, so much for joining us today. We really appreciate that very, very optimistic message. You talked about things that we still have to overcome, but that we're on the right path. So I'm with you all the way. We're with you all the way. So thank you again for being our mayor. All right. He's a great supporter of our organization. And, I know we all want to see the positive signs and a true start to our recovery soon. We've talked about recovery all throughout this program. So speaking of what's to come and planning the next steps for our industry's local recovery, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It takes a significant amount of collaboration, especially with our Meet Minneapolis board members. I'd like to thank our entire board for their support during a very challenging year. Our board is made up of individuals from the private sector, from city and county government, like the mayor whom you just heard from, and our partner organizations. And I recently had a chance to sit down and have a conversation with Julie Batliner, our board chair, to discuss our priorities and our recovery plans. So Julie, a lot has changed in a year. I think back to our January 2020 board meeting. We actually had it at the convention center, and you established some priorities for the year that we were really excited about embracing and embarking upon. And then
here we are, sitting 6 feet apart,
masked
with the
up.
masks on, safely communicating. Who would have ever thought?
What a difference a year makes.
What a difference.
So you had a set of priorities for 2020. We've now had a board meeting in January of 2021, and you established some revised priorities. Why don't you talk to us about that?
Yes, so if last year was all about pivoting, this year is all about focusing, right? So I know the Meet Minneapolis team had a lot of work to do to make sure that we were taking the amazing amount of events that were already scheduled and getting everyone set in terms of rescheduling or reprioritizing. So as we look toward going forward, we really set priorities in 3 areas. And the first one is, of course, recovery and making sure that we are having a phased approach to recovery of our business. And the second is then continuing to rebuild. And the third, of course, is making sure that we are focusing on the actions we need to take around systemic racism.
And boy, we had a year. We started out with the pandemic as a crisis, and then we had the tragic death of George Floyd on May 25th, which really set us on a path towards really dealing with some issues that we hadn't dealt with as a community and as an industry. Even on our board, we recently had a DE&I summit for the purpose of getting our board activated to really deal with those systemic issues that you have just pointed out. So we're excited about the start of this journey, but we know it's going to be a lot of hard work for us to get there.
A long journey ahead.
Right. And we also know, going back to one of your other priorities, you talked about rebuilding and recovery. And even though we don't have a lot of visitors currently, we still were able to do some things to get the local community activated, like the We Need Us campaign, for example.
Absolutely. As we looked at what we needed and what our community needed and the vibrancy of downtown, we really shifted our focus toward our people and their businesses. And so we wanted to create a symbiotic rally cry for all of us to come together. And so we created the We Need Us campaign, essentially asking people to support the local businesses that support us back and that have been there for us for so long. And so it was really starting with that inside out strategy to be able to do what we can to support each other when we didn't have a lot of visitors coming in.
And that campaign got lots of great recognition, and I know the businesses in those neighborhoods really appreciated the support.
Yes, a chance to support all businesses, but particularly our BIPOC-owned businesses as well. And then from there, we, of course, wanted to talk about, as things got a little safer, our Get Away Without Going Far campaign, too, to remind people that there are things you can do that in the city that are safe and that can be staycations to enjoy our beautiful city and support our local hotels and businesses that way, too. And so that was a good effort.
And it's important to get the locals to rediscover what we have. Oftentimes when people think of getting away, particularly this time of the year, people want to jump on a plane and get to Florida, for spring training or what have you. But it's important for us to really understand and know what it is that we have that we live with on an ongoing basis. And for us at Meet Minneapolis, it's really important for us to get the locals involved and aware of all the variety of diverse activities there are, because those locals can then become the ambassadors that we need. They can go encourage their families and friends to come visit and then take them to their favorite attraction or favorite thing to do.
Right. And in some ways, even the accessibility of doing virtual tours or other things certainly made more people aware in different ways of the great things about Minneapolis.
Exactly. You also, Julie, talked in terms of one of your priorities, the reputation management of the community.
Yep.
What are some of the things we're doing to address that?
Well, no doubt that Minneapolis has been cast into the limelight of national news. You mentioned the tragic death of George Floyd and the safety issues we've had, and on top of the COVID issue. So certainly there's been an intersection of a lot of things that we want to acknowledge, change, and continue to recover and rebuild from. And so I know that you have been a wonderful leader in terms of pulling all the organizations that represent Minneapolis together to work together to come up with the ways that we are taking action, acknowledging change, and communicating that to our influencers, media, to make sure that people know we are taking the right steps to make sure that we continue to be a great place to be.
Well, it definitely has been a partnership. We appreciate the support of the other organizations that we work with on an ongoing basis. So clearly that sets the foundation for recovery.
Right. So Melvin, talk a little bit more as CEO of Meet Minneapolis about that road to recovery. What are some things that you see going forward?
Absolutely. Well, we didn't remain stagnant during the time when there were no visitors. We've been working to put together that recovery plan for months, and at the right time we're going to be ready to launch it. But we rely on a significant amount of research, understanding when we can feel confident that there's consumer confidence has been reinstilled, because every part of the consumer's journey needs to be, the consumer needs to be comfortable and feel safe. So we, again, have worked with a number of partners, public and private, from airlines to hotel companies to other destinations, to help instill that confidence. So we are working with those partners on a global level, but locally we are continuing to make sure that our small businesses are going to be prepared once visitors come back. And we also know that it has to be a phased approach, and we've done a number of webinars every month to explain to our partners what that looks like, and we've given a lot of detail. But it's a phased, measured approach that is really going to launch in a big way once the right time comes, once the consumer is ready to really travel on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm. And so you moved from creating a tourism improvement district to creating what now we have added the word R in there to the from the TID to the TRID.
Right, Tourism Recovery and Improvement District. That, Julie, has been an effort, as you know, being a leader on our board, been on our agenda for the last 3 years. And it's good to know that we now at least have a bill number in the House and the Senate, but essentially it's a self-assessment on the hotels that generates marketing dollars that can be directed to helping to accelerate and expedite the recovery. So we're really excited about that. We are optimistic that it will get some traction in this particular legislative session, but it really is meant to help us shorten that time frame for how long the recovery is going to take.
Huge opportunity.
It really is. It really is. The other thing I would say about recovery is that it has to be realistic. We've heard all sorts of prognosticators say it might be 3, 4, 5 years, but we have to do our job to make sure that it is absolutely as short as possible to get the workers back on the job, to get these businesses open and prospering again, because those are the things that we need to be able to keep the promises that we make to the visitors and to the conventions that are coming in. And so, Julie, I know that you didn't know exactly what you signed up for when you became chair of Meet Minneapolis last year. Your very first board meeting was probably the last in-person board meeting that we've had in over a year. But I just want to thank you so much for your leadership during this time. I know you didn't expect this, but we have really benefited from all of the relationships and the experiences that you've had, and I just want to thank you on behalf of the Meet Minneapolis team and the Meet Minneapolis board.
Well, you are a great team to work with, and I love supporting the city that I live in and that my company is headquartered in, and thank you for all the work that you and the Meet Minneapolis team have been doing. It's been an ongoing sort of effort by everyone. So thank you, Melvin.
We appreciate all that you've done for us. Thank you so much. So you can see why we're so blessed to have Julie as our board chair. And I'd like to thank Julie once again for our chat and for the hard work of the entire board of Meet Minneapolis for their work over this very challenging past year that we've all experienced. You know, one thing we've touched on in that conversation was our work towards tourism recovery and improvement districts around the state of Minnesota. In fact, just yesterday, I had the opportunity to speak in front of a House and a Senate committee on this very topic. This would not have been possible without the support of State Senator Kerry Dietzig and Representative Jim Davney. I know Senator Dietzig had registered, and I hope she's able to be a part of this program, but I'd like to thank them both for being such champions of this initiative. You know, at a high level, we're proposing state enabling legislation that would allow for the formation of tourism recovery and improvement districts at the municipal level and potentially provide the opportunity to supplement, not supplant, local funding for recovery. By providing the industry with this additional tool, it can help accelerate our recovery timeline and put those hospitality workers back on the job while helping to promote Minnesota as a year-round travel destination. We look forward to sharing more with you in the coming months as the Tourism Recovery and Improvement District discussions continue. But you know, there is still so much more to our recovery. I'd like to share some of the key initiatives that Meet Minneapolis is going to be working on your behalf. Of course, we're continuing to rebook meetings and conventions that have needed to cancel because of ongoing COVID safety concerns and local capacity restrictions. We're also focusing on homegrown clients. Local corporations, we have lots of them. Investing in meetings here means supporting local jobs, supporting local small businesses, and basically supporting our local economy. We're also going after groups that are ready to hold in-person meetings and events, such as smaller meetings and amateur sporting competitions. And we're also working to demonstrate to local officials, meeting planners, and clients the protocols and plans that we've developed to safely hold events at our convention center and at our local hotels. As you heard Adam talk about, we're working to capture the drive market, those ready to venture out and explore, but perhaps they're not quite ready to get back on an airplane. Now, let's turn our focus back to our clients and meeting planners, because one of the messages we've continued to share is about our readiness to get back to hosting events. Our Meet Minneapolis team has developed new in-person site inspection protocols. Our hotels and venues have established new cleaning protocols, and our convention center has achieved the cleaning industry's gold standard for safe venues. So we say to meeting planners, clients, and potential clients, when you are ready, Minneapolis is ready. So as you can see from that video, we're truly ready to welcome people back to our city. We know the road will still have some ups and downs, though. Of course, vaccines and verdicts will both impact our city and our work. But as we move further into 2021, here's what I want you to know. That number one, Meet Minneapolis is committed to boldly telling our rich and diverse story. And we're also ready to embrace our community's mandate for social change. And we want to work with you to make sure that we're activating an inclusive recovery strategy. This is our plan, and we believe it will help all of us on our road to recovery. We do have one final video before we close the program today we'd like to share with you, but before that, I'd like to thank some folks. First of all, I'd like to thank our industry investors for today's annual meeting for their support. The Mall of America, MIA, Minnesota Twins, Minnesota Timberwolves, Minnesota Lynx, and the Minnesota Vikings. I'd also like to thank our industry supporters as seen here on your screen. We are also extremely grateful for the continued support from our elected officials and our Meet Minneapolis board members because their collaboration was critical as we pivoted, we redefined our priorities, and adapted to better serve our local community. We'd also like to thank our nearly 600 partner businesses around Minneapolis and the region. We know how vital our industry's recovery is to you and your businesses and to your workers because we need to get them back to work. We want to thank you for being here for our annual meeting today, but before we go to the video, I just want to spend just a second thanking our Meet Minneapolis team. I know I'm going off script and I don't want to make anybody upset, but clearly we've come into 2021 with a smaller staff, but still a huge workload. And I just want to thank each and every member of the Meet Minneapolis team for the great work they've done in 2020 and into 2021 and what we're doing to really restart our recovery. So again, I thank you all for being with us for this annual meeting. Have a great 2021.